Hello, this is International Master Andrew Martin here once again, and on this DVD 2 we're going to be discussing tactics. Welcome to DVD 2. Now, a master from the past, Richard Teichmann, once famously remarked that chess is 99% tactics. I'm not sure I fully agree with that remark, but there is definitely an element of truth in it. Many, if not most games, are decided by tactical mistakes. So what I'm going to do on this DVD is to introduce you in a very basic form to all the major tactical ideas in chess, and then we're going to see how they work out using complete illustrative games, so that you know, it's okay to present them in the most basic form, but what you really want to do is to see how they work out in games, and see how these tactical mistakes ensure that games are won and lost. So we go straight into the tactical ideas section now, and the first thing I want to illustrate is a pin. You may or may not have heard this term. Now, the pin is a very powerful tactical device. The pin ties the enemy down. When you pin a piece, it means that it cannot or should not move. Your piece can move, therefore it's mobile. His piece can't move, therefore it's passive. Just let me illustrate how this might happen in a game. There are two types of pin you should know about. What I'm setting up on the board is a fairly standard queen's pawn opening, and here white now puts the black knight in a pin. The white bishop pins the black knight. This is called a normal pin, because of course if black is completely insane, he can move his knight, but then of course he would lose his queen. So the knight is therefore tied down. That in essence is a pin. Now, if I take play back to the very beginning of the game, let me try and illustrate another idea for you. Alright, we'll have black play d6, white plays e4, black plays knight c6, and now the white bishop again puts the second black knight in a pin, but this time the pin is absolute. The black knight cannot move under any circumstances. It's pinned to the king. So an absolute pin and a normal pin. Now, the best advice I can give you, because pins crop up in virtually every game of chess, if you're in a pin, get out of it as quickly as possible. There are several ways to get out of a pin. The first way, and by far the simplest way, is to unpin. Therefore, black's simplest move, and probably his best move too in this position, is to just get the bishop to d7 and unpin. Now, of course, the knight can move. Okay, black's last move was very modest, but it's a perfectly reasonable defensive move. So the unpin is perhaps the most common way of getting out of a pin, and very effective. Just going back one move. A second way to resolve the problem of a pin is to attack the pinned piece. So for instance, a6 is another reasonable move for black. Now white's got to make a decision. Does he move in and double the black pawns after bishop takes c6? That's one perfectly good move. Or just going back, does he keep the pin up and increase the pressure by playing bishop a4? In this case it's true, black can again break the pin by going b5, and then probably white would retreat to b3 and the game continues. The final way you can get out of the pin is simply to take the pinned piece. Well, no such device was available here. I presume if you put the enemy in a pin and he can take you, there's some reason why you're doing that. You can recapture, or it leads to a favourable position for you. And that more or less sums up the pin. Very important that you try to pin the opponent in your games if you can, because it almost always leads to an advantage. Some sort of an advantage, even if it's temporary. The pin is powerful. Do not underestimate the power of the pin. In chess we have long range pieces, the bishop, the queen and the rook, and we have short range pieces, the king, the knight and the pawn. As far as pins go, only the bishop, queen and rook can pin. None of the other pieces can actually pin the enemy. But now we come to discuss the fork, which is probably the most common of all tactical weapons. The fork is basically a form of double attack, where one of your pieces attacks two or more of his pieces simultaneously. Usually the fork wins material, and once again it's a very powerful tactical idea. Quite often in games from beginners we see the fork commonly, and usually it happens because one of the players has overlooked the fork. Now I'm going to show you a basic fork so that you understand exactly what we're talking about here. This is a standard opening called the two knights defence, and now white moves in with his knight to create a threat. Basically his knight and his bishop are attacking f7 at the same time. And let's say black is a beginner and he completely ignores what white is doing and attacks the knight. Well, now the knight comes in and forks the queen and rook. One piece attacks two. I mean, it may well be in certain circumstances the forking piece attacks more than two pieces at the same time. But in this case, it's two pieces. Black will probably have to move his queen and surrender the rook. And as you can see, white has won a decisive amount of material. So it really is as simple as that, and very common. Every single piece on the chessboard can fork, even the lowly pawn. And if I just go back right to the beginning once again, we'll show you a typical example of a pawn fork, let's say, where white plays knight to c3 in this position. Black goes knight takes e4, sacrificing a piece temporarily in order to set up a pawn fork. There we are, that would be a typical example of a pawn fork. The pawn on d5 attacks the bishop on c4 and the knight on e4. And of course this is why the fork is more common than the pin, because every single chess piece can fork, including the king. So watch out for the fork in your game. If you count the number of pins and forks in your games, let's say from now on, if you're a beginner, the next few games that you play, do that. Count the number of forks and pins that the enemy or yourself is making. What you might find is the guy who manages to land more of these tactical ideas usually wins the game, because they're putting pressure on the opponent by doing so. So that's the fork. One piece attacks two or more pieces at the same time, and again, very powerful. Now, knight forks are especially common in a game of chess. They can crop up at every stage, but they're especially devastating in the opening, when one or other player has neglected their development to such an extent that they have permitted a tactical accident. Now here's a cute example where black gets in on the act early with a knight fork, completely wrecks white's position, and then not only does black win material, he finishes white off with a further bishop fork, which wins the white queen and compels resignation. How's it done? Well, I'll show you. White plays d4, black plays d5, and now white plays the queen's gambit, which is normally the most solid and strategic of openings. And black responds with a trappy move, bishop f5. If white isn't ready for this move, he can actually go under quite quickly, as we're about to see, as white continues to play a whole host of normal queen's gambit moves. And now black plays the slightly peculiar knight c6. Well, I'll tell you, as soon as I see that move, alarm bells start to ring in my head. I begin to wonder what black is up to. And in fact, when white moves in with an attack on b7 here, black shows what his opening play is all about when he plays knight b4. And now, I'm pretty sure that a lot of white players would be very shocked by this move. Black is moving the same piece twice, and yet the threat of knight c2 in this position is incredibly strong. The black pieces team up very well, and well, in this little snippet, white doesn't recover from the shock. He tries a check. Useless checks are also something the newcomer to the game must avoid. There's no point in giving check unless there is a reason for so doing. In this case, white is only encouraging black to play a decent move. I think white in this example is basically so shocked by what's happening to him, he can't recover in time to find any sort of defence. Now comes the knight fork. Check, forking the king and the rook. The king must move. Black snaps off the rook Dejected, white takes on c6, hoping to gain some compensation. But now a second fork. In comes the bishop. We don't often see two forking moves so early in the game, and this is completely devastating. White resigns as he is losing his queen. Well, it's not always going to be as catastrophic as that, but you get my drift. You've got to watch out for the fork at every stage. As we know, every single piece can fork, but knight forks can be especially effective. Now we come to the skewer, which is basically a form of X-ray attack. The skewer is less common than the pin and the fork, but it's still a very important tactical weapon. Here it's black to move, and black plays rook d1 check, skewering the king to the queen, almost as if the rook is holding a lance. The lance pierces the white king and skewers the white queen beyond. Again, it's only the rook, the bishop and the queen that can skewer enemy pieces. Skewers usually crop up in the endgame and they're almost always decisive. They win material, as you can see here. The white queen is lost. So watch out for the skewer. Skewers quite often take place in simplified positions when a lot of the pieces have been exchanged. Normally towards the end of the game, they're almost always a check. Now here, black is leading from the front, very bravely or foolishly, whichever way you want to look at it, with his king. However, he's about to receive a big surprise with white to move when he plays queen b3 check. This skewers the king to the queen must move, and then white snaps on queen. This type of tactical device, the skewer, crops up a lot in chess. And as I say, towards the end of the game it's far more common. There now follows a couple more examples of a skewer in actual over the board play. And here, white to play is about to skewer using his bishop. He simply plays bishop g2 check, and we see that the king is skewered against the queen. The king must move, and white takes the queen. So that's a simple example of a bishop skewer. My next position is admittedly very, very basic, but it will illustrate the concepts of discovered check and double check in a very simple form. Discovered check and double check are usually deadly moves. Double discovered check is among the strongest moves in chess aside from checkmate. They are completely forcing, they compel the enemy to do what he doesn't want to do. This is why they're so strong. And here, white to move can actually land a double discovered check in two different ways. He can either move his bishop to f4 when the black king is under attack from both the white rook and the white bishop. That's double discovered check. Or just going back, white can also give double and discovered check by going bishop to b4 check. Again, we see the white rook and bishop teaming up against the king. Now the king has to move in this situation. It wouldn't matter how many pieces black had to block these checks. He can't block two checks at the same time. So the king must move, and presumably by playing in this way, white has gained some sort of an advantage. I mean, this position is highly unlikely to occur in a game, but it does illustrate the concept in its simplest form. A double check and discovered check can often lead to checkmate, and these types of moves are seen at the very end of a lot of games. So watch out for double and discovered check in your own games. I'm sure you are playing these ideas already without actually knowing what they're called. Moving on, it's now time to look at the discovered attack, which can be a very powerful tactical weapon. A discovered attack occurs when one of your pieces moves off a line, unleashing the power of another one of your pieces behind onto an enemy piece. I think I can best illustrate this by setting up a famous position from Petrov's defence called the copycat trap, where white moves in to take the pawn on e5 and black rather carelessly plays knight takes e4. Now queen e2 immediately puts black into trouble, because when he moves his knight from f6 from e4 back to f6. White plays knight c6 check, which is a discovered attack. It's also discovered check at the same time. The queen is checking the black king, and the white knight moves to a square where he's actually en prise to no less than 3 of black's pieces, but the black queen is lost. So this is a kind of double attack at the same time, and white wins a decisive amount of material. Discovered attacks usually win material and can often decide the game. The next concept is very important, and I want you to concentrate on it carefully, because it's the first hint of combination in chess. It's called destroying the guard. Now, if one enemy piece is protected by another one, then this piece becomes vulnerable once it's attacked and subject to removal from the board. Here, the black knight protects the black rook. Now, white can take immediate advantage of this situation by going bishop takes f7 check. By doing so, he's removing the guard of the rook on d8. He more or less forces the black king to capture, and then the white rook zooms down the board and takes off the black rook. The black rook's protection has been removed by white's last excellent move, bishop takes knight check. And by doing so, white's actually winning the game now quite comfortably. So, destroying the guard means taking off a piece and then afterwards winning material as a result. If you don't understand this example, play it over again, because what white launched there was a very small combination. Only 2 moves long, but it's important. And I want you to thoroughly understand this idea before we go on. Moving onwards and upwards, we now come to the idea of the decoy, which is often confused with deflection, but in fact there's a difference between the two, quite a big difference. And a decoy occurs where one of your pieces lures one of the enemy pieces to go to a square that he really doesn't want to go to. And this hopefully will lead to advantage for you. Here it leads to a big advantage for white, who is about to land a superb smothered mate, which at the same time will illustrate our idea of decoy extremely well. We note, looking at this position, the black king is trapped in the corner to a degree, and the white knight and queen are moving in for the kill. Queen and knight are one of the strongest attacking combinations of pieces, because well, the knight does the job the queen doesn't do, so they complement each other perfectly. And here white moves in for the kill with knight f7 check. That move is completely forcing. The king must go to g8. And here comes a double and discovered check at the same time. I mentioned earlier that this type of move was usually almost decisive in a game of chess, and here this proves to be the case, because if black plays king f8, again he can't block a double check, because you can't block the action of 2 pieces at the same time. If king goes to f8, queen goes to f7 checkmate. That's fairly simple. So back to knight h6 check. Double and discovered check. He has to play into the corner, and now we play the beautiful decoying move, queen g8 check, and the rook on e8 is forced to take the queen. He really doesn't want to do that, but he's been decoyed away from e8, and now in comes the knight to f7 checkmate. So look out for the decoy in your own games. I mean, it's an advanced tactical device, and you know, you won't often get the chance to play in this sophisticated manner, but please try to understand what the decoy is all about. Run over this example again until you grasp it fully, and then your game will simply become a lot better as a result. Cast your eye over this next position, which is fairly simple in that both sides have a queen, knight and 3 pawns each, but it's going to teach us all about the idea of deflection, where you actually lure one of the enemy pieces away from an important defensive task. Here the black queen is chained to the back rank because I won't say the black king's in a mess, but when you've got a situation of this type, the black king has some problems on the back rank. So when white plays c7, which is an excellent first move, he's actually going to win material in this situation, because he's deflecting the black queen away from her defensive task of protecting the back rank. So for instance, if black goes queen takes c7, the white queen comes down and gives checkmate on f8. And what was black to do in that situation? I mean, if we go back, the black queen has got to stay guarding the back rank. So let's say she continues patrolling the back rank. Well, then we just take the knight and win decisive amounts of material. I presume after that white would go on to win with his extra piece. So the black queen was deflected away from her perfect square. You're going to see that idea cropping up. It's a slightly more advanced tactical idea than the ones that have gone before, but very important again. So once again, I should say, play through this idea until you understand it perfectly. That's a classic deflection. Cast your eye over this next position, which at first sight seems pretty level. The only difference between the two positions is that white has a light square bishop and black's bishop patrols the dark squares. However, white has set up what we call a battery, concentrated fire of more than one piece on a certain point. And this enables white to win the game immediately with queen takes h7 8. Now batteries, again, introduce us in a simple form to coordination in chess, making all your pieces work together for you. And in this case, the white queen and the white bishop form a battery to attack a certain point in the enemy camp and destroy it. So it's almost as if the pieces are teaming up against the enemy to destroy him. So a battery, it's one or more pieces teaming up to attack the enemy at a certain point. And here it was very clinical. White just went straight in and checkmated. Of course, it won't be as simple as that in your games, but you get the idea. Make your pieces work together for you. Use them together. When a piece or pieces have or has too many tasks to form at the same time in a position, we say that that piece is overloaded. Now here, the white queen is attached to the pawn on f2, protecting the king side, and she's also protecting her rook on c1. This means that she's got two tasks, defensive tasks, to perform, and black exploit this situation by going rook takes f2. This move overloads the white queen. Really, she can't avoid capturing the rook. Well, she can, but in that case black has won a very valuable pawn close to the white king. So black's rook will probably disappear from the board. But now the rook is unprotected on c1, black snaps off the rook, white must block, and now black can even garner a second pawn. So in that instance, the white queen was overloaded. This type of tactical idea crops up a lot in chess and will certainly occur in your own games. So watch out for the overloaded piece. We looked at square vacation a little while back. Now let's deal with line vacation, and basically this means when one of your pieces gets out of the way to let other pieces come in on a certain file or line and administer a decisive blow, or at least some sort of blow which leads to your advantage. Now let's consider the diagram position and I'll show you what I mean. Here we see that the black queen and the black rook form a battery on the b file, but presently the black bishop is in the way of those pieces. If only the black bishop could move out of the way to a good square, then black could move in with his queen and deliver checkmate. Fortunately, black to move can play bishop f2, and that is completely decisive. Black has three threats. He threatens checkmate on b2 and b1. He also threatens the white queen, and white cannot defend against all the threats. If white takes the bishop, black simply moves in for the kill. Checkmate. So that's line vacation. It crops up all the time in chess, and again it's a question of learning how to coordinate the pieces and seeing how they work. Square vacation occurs when one of your pieces moves aside for another one of your pieces to come in and land the decisive blow on a certain square. And if we cast our eye over this position, we will quickly see that white to move can move his rook virtually anywhere, after which black will be in discovered check and win the game. But by far his most effective move in this position is rook a6 check. He vacates the square b6 so that after king takes a6, the white queen can come in and take the rook's place, giving checkmate. Now, once again, I should stress it's not always going to be as simple as that, but you get the idea. You're getting out of the way in order that a more powerful piece can come in behind and finish the job. That is an advanced tactical idea, but it does crop up a lot in chess, so please take note. Perpetual check is a nice tactical way to end a game. It usually occurs when a player is losing the game and manages to rescue himself by giving a series of checks which the opponent's king is unable to evade. And one such situation has cropped up in the diagrammed position, where it's pretty clear that black is in a spot of bother here due to the passed pawn on b6, and white advances this pawn in order to try and make a queen. But black is in the happy situation of, believe it or not, being able to administer perpetual check here, or win the pawn. Black goes knight c7 check. White plays king to a7 to maintain contact with the pawn. Black goes knight to b5 check, and after king a8, black can play knight c7 check. White makes one last try with king b8, but black again plays knight b5, and now the threat is for the knight to go back to d6, after which the pawn on b7 is lost. So white must move aside again, knight c7 check, and we see black administering a slightly odd form of perpetual check. Usually the queen and rooks would be giving the checks, but this time it's the knight that give perpetual check, and the game ends in a draw. Just one more try. If king b8 in this situation, knight b5 and then king c8, black then wins the pawn on b7 by virtue of a fork. So many difficult or even hopeless situations can be clawed back at the death in chess by perpetual check, so watch out for that in your games. The ability to take opportunities as they arise on the chessboard is the hallmark of a good tactical player, and in particular when you're losing you have to watch out for every tactical opportunity that can possibly arise. For instance, here in the diagram position, black seems to be on the edge of victory. He's a clear knight ahead and he threatens checkmate on g2. What can white do to rescue the situation? Well, if white plays queen f5 check, which I would say is the obvious move, black simply goes king h6, and white has no useful checks left. But what happens in the diagram position if white plays the amazing move queen g8 check? If black refuses this kind offer, he quickly finds himself losing after queen h8 check, king g6, queen takes g7, checkmate. So going back to queen g8 check, of course black has to take this queen, and now white follows up with the equally amazing move rook takes g7 check. Of course what white had noted was that if he could get rid of his queen and rook, then his king and his pawns have no legal moves at their disposal. So the game is going to end actually in stalemate if black takes this rook with either the queen or the king. So black tries king f8, but now the white rook becomes what we call a desperado, offering himself at every turn on the 7th rank, and the game ends in a draw because black cannot capture this rook, otherwise the game ends in stalemate, and if he doesn't capture it, he's got to submit to this embarrassing series of checks by the rook. Wherever the black king goes, it's going to be pursued by this desperado rook, and so this astonishing finish ends the game in a draw. I think what I'm saying, this example teaches us several things about chess. You've got to look out for every conceivable opportunity to save the game, even in apparently hopeless situations. Never give up. I think that's the main lesson learned from this particular example. The back rank mate is something every level of chess player has to watch out for. It's especially common at beginners level. I've seen it happen literally thousands of times in games. And let's address this situation by looking at a very simple position here, where both sides have a rook and 3 pawns each. The main differences in the position are, firstly, the position of the pawns on the king side. We note that white's got a pawn on h3, which gives his king the ability to escape, whereas black actually has no such avenue of escape. This means that white to play can actually land a decisive blow by playing rook d8 check, and black has been back rank mated. Quite often in chess, it's a good idea to give your king a little bit of room on the back rank. The move h3, well, this move was played earlier by white. It may have looked like a waste of time at the moment white played it, but look how useful it is now. It stops white from being back rank mated. So the moral of the story is clear. Watch out for back rank mates. You know, you've got to guard your back rank very carefully indeed. Now, my second example of a back rank mate is slightly different. It actually comes from a very old game played by a guy called Greco back in Europe in 1620, when perhaps the standard of play overall was nowhere near as high as it is today. Nevertheless, it illustrates our idea of back rank mate very well. The only thing is, I think you should shut your eyes when you see some of black's moves. Anyway, our hero Greco is playing white, and he essays the romantic King's Gambit. This is a very risky opening, but it teaches the art of attack like no other start to the game. His opponent, who shall remain nameless, plays d5, opening up lines for all his pieces. White takes on d5, and black recaptures with the queen, which is actually a very bad move because it loses time. It gives white an extra tempo. The knight comes out with gain of time. White makes a useful move, and all black can do is retreat his queen. White continues to bring out the pieces because even back in 1620, Greco was one of the greats because he understood, you know, that development was more important than material in the opening. He understood that he wasn't going to win the game quickly unless he could get all his pieces out into the game to start the attack. So white is quite happy to offer the f-pawn with check. Greco plays king f2. Now black plays another really bad move. I'm not sure what advice to offer black in this position because he's already in terrible trouble with his queen stuck in front of his king. Bishop c5 check doesn't help matters at all. It's a typical beginner's move because it just encourages white again to play a move he wants to make anyway. d4 gains time, pushes the bishop back. The bishop has to move for a second time. And after black's really terrible opening play, it's no surprise that white can land a decisive blow here by giving check. And the main idea of that move is not so much to give check as much as to make room for the rook on h1 to come across to e1 and decisively pin the black queen to the king. So for instance, if black plays a move like c6 in this position, white just plays rook e1 and wins the queen. In the game, going back to bishop b5 check, conveniently the black player played king f8, white went rook e1 anyway, black went queen f5, and hey presto, white lands the back rank mate in slightly unusual circumstances, but nevertheless that is a back rank mate. In this case, black was the architect of his own downfall. He didn't develop his pieces quickly enough. He left his king high and dry in the centre, and he wasted a colossal amount of time. So, you know, almost positional suicide all the way through. Zugzwang is a German term, and loosely translated it means compulsion to move. A situation can occur in a game of chess where really you have no useful move left. Any move you make leads to a deterioration in your position, and this is perhaps the most basic situation I can find which illustrates what Zugzwang really means. Here, if it's black to move, black's got only one legal move. Black would much rather pass in this situation and put white on move, but if it's black to move, black has to move out with king d7, and then white moves in for the kill with king f7, after which the promotion of the pawn cannot be stopped. Just retracting one move, as I said, obviously black would like white to be on move in this situation, because white would have to play king e6. Any other king move loses the pawn, but after king e6, of course, it's stalemate. So in fact, despite the fact this is a basic position, it's actually mutual zugzwang. Neither side wants to be on move in this situation. So zugzwang, simply stated, is a very bad situation to be in. And well, once you've been in zugzwang, you won't forget it very easily. We now come to a couple of German terms, Zwischenzug and Zugzwang. You'll hear these terms cropping up from time to time when tactics are being discussed, or you might play through a game in the magazine and see somebody mentioning these ideas in the notes, and these situations will certainly crop up in your own games. Again, I'm going to keep it as simple as possible, and we'll deal with Zwischenzug first, which basically means an in-between move. Now here, if we consider this position, black plays rook takes h4, and well, the beginner might automatically stretch out to play queen takes h4 in reply, but in that case black will be a clear pass pawn up for nothing and will probably go on to win the game. However, what black overlooks in this position is the in-between move queen d8 check, and this turns the position on its head, because black must move his king and now white gets to take the rook with check. What a difference, because king must go back to g8. Now white comes in with his queen again giving check, black must play king h7, and white snaps off the pawn on a5, which brings us to a situation of material equality and a likely draw. So the in-between move was queen d8 check, and it's a move, the Zwischenzug, which can easily be overlooked. So watch out for these in-between moves in your games. They certainly crop up quite frequently. Before we rejoin the wonderful world of tactics, I want to give you now a mental checklist, a blunder check procedure, which is going to help you immensely in your games. It's a routine which you follow after the opponent has made a move and before you make a reply. Simply ask yourself a series of questions. The first thing is to check all the captures in the position and the checks. Can he check you in any way? Can he take any of your pieces? And vice versa. After you've done that, you ask yourself the question, what is he trying to do? What are his plans? What are his objectives? Then you ask yourself, what am I trying to do? What are my plans? What are my objectives? And the final thing is to check for surprise moves. Have I missed anything? Should be your mantra. Laborious at first, this routine soon becomes second nature, until it eventually, after a very short period of time, becomes ingrained in your mental makeup. You just do it naturally. You see, strong players just do this routine automatically, and you will avoid blunders using it, I promise you. This routine, although it's simplistic, has worked wonders with many players who were blunder prone. And of course, once they start cutting out obvious mistakes in their games, their results improve. They become revitalised as chess players. They gain confidence as a result. Now, I must admit, it is rather tedious to use this routine at first, but there is a point behind it. So follow this routine. I'll just summarise it now. 1. Note all the checks and captures. 2. Ask yourself, what is he trying to do? 3. Ask yourself, what am I trying to do? Finally, number 4, check for surprise moves. Have I missed anything? You'd be amazed. This will cut out most of the major blunders in your game. Okay, well, I definitely think it's a good idea to break up large amounts of information with the occasional illustrative game. So I've got a couple of games from you now which I hope will introduce you to the way these tactical motifs appear over the board. I mean, what you want really is when you come to play the game of chess yourself, you want to be able to recall how these tactical ideas work so that you can use them to your advantage in your own games. So my first game comes from the French Team Championship in March 2009. Playing white is a French master called Yannick Berthelot, and playing black is Sebastian Feller, Grandmaster, graded 2-5-2-5. And the opening is the French defence. White opens with e4, black plays e6, white plays d4, black plays d5, and the French defence, I'm not sure whether it's an opening which can be recommended to beginners or starters to the game. It's a very solid opening. Three-time world champion Mikhail Botvinnik stated that the French was a difficult and dangerous opening. It's certainly dynamic, although black has a slight problem with the bishop on c8. It's not a free and easy position for black, it's complex, and the French defence suits players who have a reasonably sophisticated understanding of the game. It's not at all clear what black is going to do with his bishop. In return for getting this sturdy influence in the centre, black has had to block this bishop in. And so there are a number of question marks hanging over black's position in the opening phase of the game. However, black is basing his play on counter-attack. And already, as you can see, black is threatening pawn takes pawn, which is why white brings his knight out to c3 to defend the pawn. Now there are a number of alternatives for white. White can try knight d2, that's called the Tarrasch variation. Again, the slight problem with that move is that white blocks in his bishop on c1. But the reason for putting the knight on d2 is that white wants to be able to play c3 at the right moment, should black think about attacking that pawn. I mean, it's routine in the French defence for black to play a move like c5 attacking the centre. So white always wants to have the option of playing c3 in mind should this situation occur. Going back to d5, white may play e5. This is called the advanced variation. Then I think we do see the classic counter-attack on the centre with c5, white plays c3, and then there's a pitched battle going on around the d4 square. Black attacks this pawn with everything he knows, and white defends it. And the idea is, white's idea is that white's pawn on e5 gives him an advantage in space. We'll be going on to discuss the idea of space in a bit more detail later on. But anyway, this is an unclear situation, very, very complex. Going back to d5 one more time, pawn takes pawn introduces the infamous exchange variation, after which black plays e takes d5. This could be one drawback for a lot of players in playing the French defence. We have one open file here, the e file, and the position tends towards symmetry. However, this should not dissuade players from playing the French defence. You should just know that if white wants to play a very boring and dull game, he can do so after he takes d5. But going back to Berthelot Feller, knight c3 is probably the best move for attacking players, defending the pawn, and black plays knight f6 attacking the pawn. Again, a lot of beginners think, well, why can't we take the pawn on e4? It's almost as if they think if it can be taken, it must be taken. Well, this is not necessarily the case. White's knight is encouraged to come to a very strong central square, and black has certain problems equalising the game in this situation. White has more freedom of movement. I think that's the main reason black players don't choose this variation too often, although it is playable. But for the time being, we see black counter-attacking e4, and here comes the first interesting move from our tactical point of view. White pins the knight on f6. Now, the classical variation of the French involves the immediate unpin with bishop e7. This is by far the most common move. Then white pushes his pawn on, black brings his knight back, white takes off on e7, and black takes back with the queen. And when you see the huddle of black pieces on the queen side, you begin to think, you know, what on earth is black doing? But in fact, the black position is very compact. Again, black is relying very much on pawn attacks on the white centre, like c5 and f6 to furnish counterplay. And despite the fact that white's got, let's say, a small strategical advantage after f4, c5, knight f3, and then castles, for instance, due to the fact that none of his pieces are inhibited from developing, I think black is in reasonable shape here. Black has good counter chances in this position. But going back to bishop g5, in our game, interestingly, Feller played bishop b4, a counter pin, a counter attack on white's knight at c3. This is known as the McCutcheon variation, and it's one of black's sharpest moves. Well, white thought, I've pinned the knight on f6, why not take advantage of it? And once again, at first sight, it looks as though black is actually losing a piece in this situation. But now comes a further counter-attack by black, h6, which is the point of the whole line. This is another way of getting out of a piece. I did mention it was possible to attack the pinning piece, and here this is black's only salvation. Of course, if white drops back with bishop h4, black has to go the whole hog and play g5. And admittedly, the black pawn position is shattered after e takes f6, g takes h4. But this position might not be so bad for black. He can actually look forward very quickly to rounding up this pawn on f6. And he hasn't lost material. He's got two nice bishops, and the pin on c3 is still on. So, I don't know, that variation is not too good for white. If white takes on f6 with the pawn, black must capture the bishop on g5. And a lot of beginners would think, well, once white plays f takes g7, black's survival is not long for this world, because this looks like a crushing move. But black is still surviving with honour after rook g8. And if white sets a little trap here, queen h5, hoping for black to play rook g7 so white can go in with a fork, queen h8 check, again black can defend against this comfortably with bishop f8. After queen h5, another interesting move is queen to f6, after which again black regains this pawn on g7 and emerges with an excellent position. I think what this short variation teaches us essentially is that white can't hope to attack and demolish black's position with only one piece. I mean, he's going in here with his queen alone. The pawn on g7 is a goner, and black is developing at the same time as regaining material. So what all this means is, and going back to h6 now, is that h6 is a very effective move, and a lot of people like the McCutcheon for its counter-attacking potential, and because black can negotiate the tactics in the early stage of the game. Well, white played bishop e3 in this game. White usually plays bishop d2 in this position, breaking the pin, and then black will take on c3. And the main line goes b takes c3 by white, knight e4. The knight on e4 is black's linchpin in this variation, and then white would go queen g4, counter-attacking once again on g7. And so battle is joined. You may be noticing already that this opening leads to a very fierce struggle, which is why a lot of players employ it and are happy to fight against it with white. In general, the fearless approach to chess is the correct one. It's going to be the style which garners most points and gets you respect from your opponent. The more passive the style, in general, the less respect you're going to get from your opponent. And so, if you're starting out in chess, it's best to cultivate a nice free-flowing attacking style, because you're going to win more games if you do that. Well, bishop e3 was answered by knight e4, and now we see the pin being accentuated against c3. But amazingly, white ignores this pin and goes in for another counter-attacking move of his own, queen g4, which threatens queen takes g7, which is pretty destructive. And black moves to meet this with another peculiar looking move, king f8. But a move which is probably necessary. There is another move here, and that's g6, but that move weakens the king side. So in general, black thinks to himself, well, white's got to deal with my threat on c3 fairly quickly, or I'm going to win a rook in the corner. So if I just protect my pawn economically with the king, let's see how he deals with the idea. Now, just going back, you might have wondered what would happen after knight takes c3, and I really don't blame you, because that move looks quite strong. So that if white goes queen g7, black will move his rook, and now there seems to be a threat of discovered check with the knight. Well, after that, I think white can play the point of the whole line, a3. Now white's attacking two pieces at the same time, and if bishop a5, then he can go in with bishop takes h6. This is not a favourable situation for black, because He's got pieces under attack, the rook especially, and I'm not sure how black plays this position. For instance, if he goes queen e7, white even has the amazing move here, bishop d2. A theme which actually we will see in the game a little later on. White actually pins the knight on c3, a counter pin. This is an intricate battle of pin and counter pin in the opening. And, well, white's going to regain the material back he just lost. The knight is pinned. It's going to be lost if black goes knight e4. White can simply snap off the bishop on a5. And now you see white's established a winning trump. This pawn on h2 is called a pass pawn. And as you can see, it's got a free run all the way up to h8. Suffice it to say that this position has been encountered in Grandmaster play and seen to be very unfavourable for black. So that takes us all the way back to queen g4 and the modest, outwardly modest king f8. Now we get this idea of a3. Alright, if black wants to take on c3 with the bishop, let him, and then grab another pawn. White is building up terrific attacking chances in this position with ideas such as h4, and now white's even thinking about bringing in the kitchen sink for the attack with rook h3 to f3, after which the black king starts to feel the heat. In general, in this position, if you're thinking about grabbing material in the opening, the opening is the phase of the game where development is far more important than material. Okay, you can establish a winning advantage on material in the opening, but it's much more sensible, usually, to get your pieces out. So, this is why black just plays bishop a5 in the game. He wants none of that pawn grab, and he keeps the pressure on. And white physically keeps on encouraging him to take that pawn after bishop d3, and black finally bites the bullet. Well, we know what to do now. Pin and counter pin. White does not take the knight on c3. Instead, he pins that knight, and when the knight moves, if the knight moves, black is going to lose his bishop on a5. But it's now that Feller starts to play very, very well. It looks as though he's in a spot of trouble in this position, because he's pinned. Okay, he's a piece up, and his king seems to be exposed, but the typical French defence move c5, a counter-attack on the white centre, now starts to look quite decent. And black has good counterplay in this situation. White takes back the knight, about time, and black brings his knight out to c6. Very typical of the French defence to organise play against the pawn at d4. No matter, says white, I shall just bring my own knight out defending, and now I'm looking forward to an attack on the black king. Black blocks the position with c4. What black is hoping for when he plays this variation is to first of all ride out the initial tactical exchanges. Secondly, he now hopes to think about going after white's weakened queenside pawns. If there's a drawback to this type of position from white's point of view, it has to be that there's no plan B. White more or less has to land a decisive punch on the enemy king, on the black king at f8, or he's going to feel the weakness of his pawns on the queen side. And this motivates black's next move, queen b6. Black is thinking of going on a raid with his queen all the way down to b2, and this is exactly what happens. Now white has some problems with his pawns. He's probably going to lose one of these pawns. So what he's got to do is to launch some sort of attack here and try to compensate for the lost pawn by more or less checkmating black. However, Feller seems to have judged this situation very well, and if rook fc1 is the best move that white's got, then I really do begin to believe in black's position. Now, just going back, when I first saw this game I thought rook fc1 is very passive, but then I understood black's idea. Black wants to take, if we think of the most important pawn on the board, the pawn at c2. If he gets this pawn, his queen can return to the king side to help in the defence. And if black was a pawn up and he managed to exchange the queens off, this will make his life a lot easier. So this is why white defends the pawn at c2, allowing black to take on c3, so that, you know, hopefully white will have a bit more time to build up the attack. Well, bishop takes c3 was played. Looked a little bit submissive when I first saw it. I thought, well, why can't white just attack the queen with rook ab1? then I think black simply takes this pawn on a3, and the problem for white is he can't play rook on a1, rook to a1 in this situation, because black can just whip it off. And without rook a1, white is simply 2 pawns down. It really is as simple as that. Whereas we talked in a previous variation of white's passed pawn on h2, here black now has the same sort of advantage, this incredibly strong passed pawn on a5. So if white didn't checkmate black in the next few moves, I guess black would simply think about pushing that pawn all the way down the board. So going back to bishop takes c3, white took it, black recaptured, and now h4, not so surprising. I think white is down to attacking moves, vague attacking moves of this type. Rook g8, carefully defending. Queen f4, making room perhaps for the g pawn to try and bash through to the king. Bishop d7, pawn up to h5. I think white plays that because he's still thinking about coming through with g4, g5, but he doesn't want black to be able to play h5 in response. So he fixes the black king side by playing h5. And now fella just calmly moves his king out of the way. An excellent move. And after rook a2, which again is a very miserable move for white, but I think white has to somehow include his rooks in the attack, otherwise there is no attack. And now rook a f8. And I think we can definitely say in this position black is winning. Black has negotiated all the complications. He's a pawn up, and he's got his pieces in nice places. Moreover, black is now thinking about, believe it or not, attacking the white king with moves like f6 or g6, which in turn open up files for the black rooks. So this is an excellent situation for black. Rook d1 was played by white. Black played king d8. White played king f1, seeing a possible black attack brewing, and black just calmly went king c8, getting his king out of harm's way before launching the counter-attack with g5. Another typical French defence idea, and in this case exceptionally strong. Black's point, well, what is it? First of all, if white takes en passant, black has an enviable choice of recapture. I'm pretty sure he would capture with the rook in this situation, and then maybe play his other rook to g8, or certainly think about it. h5 is also possible after rook takes g6, with the idea of rook g4, after which the pawn on d4 would start to be exposed. So white settles in the game for the miserable move queen e3. He could go on an adventure with queen f6, but then the d pawn drops, and well, trading a central pawn for a wing pawn is hardly to white's advantage in this situation. I really don't like this for white. His centre is going to get annihilated, and all the black pieces are in very good positions. But the game, I'm not sure. Queen e3, I mean, swapping off when you're material behind. I just think white got demoralised with his game. The fact that the opening had gone completely wrong, and all his pieces are on very clumsy squares. So black essentially strolls to victory from here on in. He continues his attack on the king side. He plays f5. E takes f6. And because the pawn on f6 is pinned now by the rook on f8, black can take time out for the excellent move bishop e8. And the point of this is that when white plays bishop takes g4, black has rook takes f6, both attacking the king and defending the pawn at the same time. And after king g1, he has rook g5. I have never seen a white position more disjointed than the one we have here. All the white pieces are not coordinated with each other, and the rooks make a pathetic impression when compared to the black rooks. Black is very compact. He's attacking the pawn on h5 now, and the white king is really under extreme pressure. What does white do? He continues to swap off. This can be no answer in this situation, with black so well coordinated. Pawn up to c3. There goes another one. Bishop takes h5. Bishop h3, retaining some hope, and continuing to pin the pawn on e6, but this pin is easily resolved. Black simply just gets out of the pin. King comes to e1. Rook g8. rook f2. Making a move like this depends very heavily on entry squares. If the white rook could find some entry square somewhere in the black camp, it would really help, but there's no entry square to be found. So black played b5, white went rook b2, black went rook b8, and white decided, in a rather gentlemanly fashion I must say, to resign this position. What happens when a guy resigns? Well, basically he gives up, and black is presented with the win. What white is saying to black is that I've got no hope in this position. I can see what you're going to do. You are a pawn up. Every one of your pieces is perfectly placed, and your winning plan is a5 and then b4, breaking through, forcing a passed pawn. That pawn on c4 will become passed in the long run, and it's a hopeless struggle against a player of Grandmaster standard. So that was an interesting game in many ways. I hope you enjoyed it. The opening skirmishes, tactical skirmishes, were interesting. Both players pinning and counter pinning, and it was fun all the way through, I think. The position after e4, e5 leads to what we know in chess as the open game. It's called the open game because the pieces can stream out very quickly and freely, more so after e4, e5 than after any other opening moves. And it's obvious that with the pieces coming out quickly, that tactical skirmishes are inevitable. So if you play the open game, and this is how most beginners are invited to play at the start of their chess careers, you're going to learn about how to develop quickly, you're going to learn the basics of chess in the quickest possible manner, and you're going to learn how to attack. It really is as simple as that. The open game teaches the art of attack. Which brings us to the game Ninov versus Marzolo. Both players are international masters. This game was played in a French Open tournament in 2008. It is a short, sharp, shocking game with many tactical moments. So I thought I would present it to you now. For the time being, both players develop normally. I mean, just taking play back one move. White has already created, after two moves, a threat. Now, threats are a very good thing to create against the opponent. They put pressure on the opponent. They put pressure on the enemy to defend. And if you can put pressure on the enemy, the more pressure you can mount, the better your chance of winning the game. It's much better to be putting pressure on than to be continually defending against threats. So, okay, this one's an easy threat to nullify. Black plays knight c6. White continues with bishop c4. Black plays knight f6, the two knights defence, and now white goes in with knight g5. We saw this basic position in our section on forks. White is threatening the pawn on f7 with his knight, and I said that if black ignored the threat, he would get into trouble. Well, that's exactly what Marzolo does. He plays the amazing move bishop c5, and this is known as the Wilkes-Barre variation. It is an astounding idea. Black intends nothing other than a sacrifice of a piece, maybe more pieces than one, in order to get a massive counter-attack against the white king. Now, going back to knight g5, it's far more common for black in this situation to block the threat by playing d5. Blocking the threat is always the best way if you can do this. And in this case, black blocks white's threat and counterattacks at the same time. Play then goes pawn takes pawn, knight a5. This is probably the best move. Please note that if black plays knight takes d5 in this situation, white has two dangerous moves. He can play d4, which I think is the best move, or he may embark on the fried liver attack, a very famous chess opening where white sacrifices a piece in order to fork the king and the knight. Black's only defence is king e6, and then builds up on the pinned piece at d5 with a very strong attack. I would advise beginners to steer clear of this position, because the defensive task that black has in this situation is very serious indeed. I mean, it may be that black can survive this position if he defends perfectly, or if you're using a computer. But for the average player, forget it. It's just going to be too difficult. Fortunately for black, he does have this counter-attacking move, knight a5, but you have to be prepared to sacrifice a pawn. After bishop b5 check, c6, d takes c6, b takes c6, and now white's a pawn, but he gets kicked around for a while, and black gets very nice development here after, for instance, another move like bishop d6. So this is a known gambit. That's one way to play this line for black. It's not totally clear what's going on in this position, but it's been seen thousands of times at grandmaster level, and it always promotes an interesting game. However, perhaps even more interesting, like I said, is this counter-attacking move bishop c5. And what is actually interesting in our featured game is that white is going to grab material with knight takes f7. Well, this is the acid test of bishop c5. Going back, I think actually there is a better move in this situation. I think bishop takes f7 is the best move. Yes, black still has counter-attacking opportunities after king e7, but I actually think white is better after bishop d5 in this position, if you know your stuff. However, this is no place to get involved in theoretical discussions. Basically, white is not greedy in this variation. He settles for a pawn rather than large amounts of material, and displaces the black king. You just have to know this variation, I would say, in order to play it. Black gets a reasonable initiative with the idea of queen e8 to g6, but that's it. However, going back, knight takes f7 has to be the challenging move, and now black launches the onslaught with bishop takes f2 check. It has to be something like this, or black would simply be losing huge amounts of material with no compensation. Now white plays king f1. He's saying to black, well, you're still forked. I'm not going to take your bishop and expose my king. I'm going to move my king to f1, and then I'm going to take your rook on h8. Just to show you what happens after king takes f2, well, I mean, it's obvious that white is going to be under serious fire after knight takes e4. Wherever he puts his king, the black queen is going to enter the fray, probably on h4. And once again, the onus is on both players to know their stuff. You need Olympian memory to play this variation with either colour, because the variations are so intricate. But many games have been lost by white in this situation, and very quickly and brutally, because when your king is under fire, you know, you can easily make a mistake. It's a nerve-wracking situation, which again I would advise beginners to try to steer clear of. Keep your safe king, and chess is a much easier game to manage when your king is safe, in contrast to here with the white king stuck in the open. Anyway, what's interesting about this game is that Ninov takes and lives after king f1. Black plays queen e7, knight takes h8, thank you very much, the fork seems to have succeeded, and now comes d5. All hands on deck. Black is casting caution to the winds. All he's interested in this position is getting to grips with the enemy king, and this he hopes to do by playing knight d4. So the black pieces are getting closer to the white king. Probably now black is threatening an idea such as bishop g4, which puts the question to the white queen. So that is black's threat, if you like. Alright, d6. Opening up lines for the bishop on c4. Square vacation, if you like. The point of this is perhaps even to think about bringing the knight back from the dead. That knight's trapped on h8. Well, now, of course, that knight can come back to f7. I'm not actually sure whether white is threatening to do that just yet, but black's certainly got to think about it. Now, d6 seems to take black completely aback in this game. Now, Marzolo is a strong international master, almost grandmaster standard. Yet it turns out he doesn't really know his theory. He's just playing this line, and I'm pretty sure that he wasn't expecting white to play into this, because when somebody plays the Wilkes Barre, hardly anybody goes this way with white, because it's so risky. I mean, you've got your king on f1. What we're seeing here is actually Ninov displaying tremendous theoretical knowledge in this game. And look in the theory books or the opening manuals, and you'll see them littered with black wins in this variation, simply because I think we admire the way black plays the opening. We like the thought of this audacious sacrificial play and white getting duffed up. But, well, white wins this game, and I think in the future black players who play this variation are going to have to be careful of this line. Well, c takes d6, and now white calmly took the bishop on f2, so white is really challenging black to show his stuff in this game. d5. Okay, that's a natural enough move. Going back, I prefer personally bishop g4, maintaining momentum. I think as black you've simply got to recognise that you're going to lose unless you get all your pieces into the attack. So I think black should simply attack the queen, gaining time, and then castle on the queen side. Nevertheless, even here, I'm not at all sure that despite the very precarious looking position of white's king, that white is not winning. For instance, there was an old correspondence game which went king g1, d5, bishop d3. Black continued to hammer away on the bishop. Now comes a counter-attacking move, c3. I think we can list counter-attack under tactics because this is a tactical interchange. Black took on d3, white took on d4. Now came knight h5, and the idea of this is certainly to introduce the rook into the attack. Queen f2, rook f8. I think it will be very unlikely that this could be an over-the-board game. To go into this variation with white would require enormous bravery, because black is continuing to develop with threats. For instance, in this position, he's now threatening rook f1 checkmate. White played h3, incredibly calm. Of course, what white's saying is, you just haven't got enough firepower to finish me off, and that's exactly how it proves. Excuse me. Knight came into g3. Exactly what happens. Knight comes to d3, and now white employs a typical master device. He gives back material in order to reach a winning position. Black is invited to take the rook in the corner and take on h8, but after e4, he finds that he is still a piece down, despite the fact that he's won 2 white pieces in the last few moves. So in a correspondence game where players have got unlimited time to look over the position, well, not unlimited time, but plenty of time anyway, it's obvious that black has run out of compensation. So going back to Ninov Marzolo now and d5, it may well be that black really hasn't got enough for his material disadvantage in this position, despite the very precarious looking nature of the white king position. So it's very strange. It really is a very, very strange type of position. Alright, well, d3 was played by Ninov, offering the bishop. Now white played h3, and the idea of the last 2 moves was to cut the knight on f6 out of the game. The knight was threatening to enter the game on both e4 and g4, so white has simply cut that out. White is saying, well, I'm so far ahead in material, all I've got to do is to get the rest of my pieces out and get my king to safety, and then you're going to run out of ideas. And amazingly, this is exactly what happens. Black cannot find any compensation for the piece he's lost. White plays rook e1. Now he's thinking about attacking this pawn on e5. Black castles, bringing the last piece into the game. White moves aside, consolidating. Black gets to take the knight, but after bishop e3, if we count the pieces, we now find that black is the exchange down, and now white is threatening bishop takes d4, which would take advantage of the pinned piece, or the pinned pawn, excuse me, on e5. Queen d6 by black, stepping out of the pin, if you like. Knight d2, bishop c6, and now white continues to bring his knight into the game with knight c4. Black plays queen d5, a battery of queen and bishop, checkmate on g2. White defends. Black plays b6. Well, once you see black playing moves like he's just been playing, b6 and king b7, you know the game is up, because if he can't find anything better than that, he's simply the exchange down, rook for knight, without any compensation. When you're material ahead, by far the safest way to play is to swap off and so this is why white plays bishop takes d4. Queen takes d4 check. Queen f2, and Marzolo had had enough. He actually resigned. The black attack has run out of steam. Well, black can continue to swap off with queen takes queen, but after king takes queen, this is a fairly straightforward win for white. The pawn on e5 is not long for this world, and well, black has no attack left. Tactical blunders abound at all levels in chess, but they are obviously less frequent the higher one climbs up the greasy pole. Quite often at club level they are caused simply by tiredness or carelessness, let's say. Now, what I'm going to do next is to actually give you a method of avoiding tactical mistakes in your games. I think this is going to be helpful. It's called the blunder check procedure. So we'll go on to look at that now. Okay, well, it's time now for another illustrative game. This is quite an old game, it comes from 1925, but it is very instructive nonetheless. It contains a whole host of tactical adventures. Playing white is, well, at the time, a relatively unknown Mexican master called Carlos Torre, and playing black in this game is none other than Emmanuel Lascar, a very, very famous player who was world champion for 27 years, an astonishing achievement. And obviously, despite the fact that Lascar's got the black pieces in this game, he would have been expecting to defeat the Mexican master fairly easily. Well, what a surprise he was in for on that particular day. Now, the opening in this game is also of interest because, believe it or not, it's known as the Torre attack. I think the opening got its name as a result of the game you're about to see. Such a shock was the result of this game in the chess world. It was, you know, quite amazing that this unknown Mexican could possibly beat the world champion, and in such a devastating style, as you will see. What we are actually about to witness in this game is a tactical motif known as the windmill. And if you manage to land a windmill in your own games, it's likely that you will be actually winning that game. So powerful is this tactical idea. But for the time being, let's just go on with the opening moves. And I have to say that the Torre attack, the way white lays out his pieces in this particular opening line, is a very logical and easy to understand opening. Perfect for the club player or the player who wishes to improve. White's opening system is based on very solid foundations. As you can see, he's bringing out all his pieces. He's reinforcing his centre, which makes it very difficult for black to actually attack the white central formation. And black has no easy route to equality against the Torre attack. He's got a number of ideas, a number of systems which are perfectly okay for him. But if black doesn't know what he's doing, then he can often fall foul of a devastating kingside attack, because that is white's eventual aim in this system. White develops his minor pieces, he gets castled, then he looks for opportunities to attack the black kingside. Well, what Lascar does is respond cagily. He knows that white's system is very logical. He knows that he can't assault the white formation just like that, but he wants to win the game. So what he does is very cunning. He avoids immediate contact. He creates a no man's land on the 5th rank, as indicated by the green arrow, and he waits for the opportunity to get counterplay. He lays out his pieces very, very cagily. It's almost as if black has 3 ranks to white's 4, with this no man's land on the 5th rank. That's okay with black if you have room for your pieces. So the challenge for Lascar really is to find room for all his pieces, and at the same time develop counterplay gradually. Obviously he's got to watch out for what Torre is doing on the kingside, but for the time being there doesn't seem to be any kingside pressure. So over the next couple of moves both players just develop their pieces very sensibly. White brings his rook to the middle, and black fortifies his kingside. And now it's really down to white to demonstrate what he's doing in the position. I mean, otherwise the white position is all dressed up and nowhere to go, you might say. So Torre plays bishop c1. Now that, when I first saw it, I thought that is the move of a man who doesn't know what to do in the position. But then it became clear that actually white is vacating the g5 square for his knight. He wants to try and add fuel to the flames by playing knight g5. And with queen h5 in the offing, threats could easily start to mount against h7 and f7 in this position very quickly, if black doesn't now start to create counterplay. Well, of course, guys who have been world champion for 27 years have an acute sense of what is possible in a chess position, so Lasker knows that this is the right moment to start counterplay on the queen side. By pushing the white knight across to a3, and I'm sure Torrey played that move to avoid exchanges, he's letting black get some counterplay with b4. C takes b4, knight takes b4, and here's the move Torrey was probably relying on to give him some chances, queen h5. Now there are certainly very dangerous threats to both f7 and h7. But Lasker plays simply, bishop takes g5, showing his excellent defensive skills. I mean, one way of actually beating back an attack is to exchange off the attacking pieces. So this is the simple mechanism that black is just going through with here. He's taking off the knight on g5, then he's removing the bishop on d3. Admittedly, the white rook can come across to g3 now, but let's take a look at the positives from black's point of view. There's an isolated pawn on d4, and there's an offside knight on a3. All of these factors in the position give black hope, and with Lasker's next move, queen a5, he's beginning to actually get the upper hand in this game. He's hitting the rook on e1, and he's also attacking the bishop on g5, which is now pinned to the white queen. So white has now got to start playing with ingenuity to rescue this situation, and Torrey proves himself up to the job, for the time being at least, with the move b4. And this is a purely tactical move. Now, well, actually this is quite an interesting situation, because at first sight it looks as though black can't take this pawn in view of rook b1, when the black queen is actually skewered to the bishop on b7. But it turns out that actually black can escape this situation, and maybe this is the variation Lasker could have gone in for and should have gone in for. He escapes with queen a5. And the first point, of course, is that white can't take the bishop on b7 because of queen e1 checkmate. Now, Lasker probably didn't do this, and going back to queen a5, because of the move knight c4. But the problem with white's position is all his pieces are undefended. The queen's undefended, the knight is undefended, both his rooks are undefended, and loose pieces can often drop off the board. I think black can bring his position together in this situation with queen d5. Black now threatens checkmate himself on g2. So when white plays knight e3, black can continue to assault the undefended white pieces by playing queen e4. And if white brings everything together with rook d b3, then black simply goes bishop c6. And I'm not sure why Lasker didn't go in for this variation, because at the end of it, he's a pawn up, and white's kingside attack, well, really is nowhere to be seen. I'm not even sure how, without his rooks, white works up any sort of kingside attack in this situation. So it's funny, going back to b4, despite the fact it looks impossible to take that pawn, I think that's precisely what Lasker should have done. But he was not a man to shirk risk in his games, and so queen f5 is also a logical move. I mean, it attacks the rook on d3 and maintains the pin on the bishop at g5. Alright, Torrey swings his rook across to g3. And now probably this is the next move that Lasker was relying on, h6. He wants to win that pinned bishop. Alright, knight c4 by white. For the time being, he's actually dissuading black from taking the bishop, because if black takes on g5, white gets the chance to land a three-way fork, a splendid move, with the splendid move knight takes d6. And now the queen's under attack, the rook on e8, and the bishop on b7. Probably black's best in this situation is to go queen g6. And that leads to Leads to the game burning out really after a lot of exchanges. Queen takes g6, knight takes g6, knight takes b7. Let's say black plays rook a b8 here. Then white goes knight c5 and brings everything together at the end with the move knight b3. And it's hard to see this game between two strong master players, even given that one of them is world champion and the other guy is an unknown master. It's hard to see this situation in ending in anything other than a draw. I mean, I think black plays, for instance, f6 in this situation, and it's fairly level. So, going back to the game, Lasker wants to win this game, and that's why he keeps the tension with queen d5. He's still hoping to win that bishop on g5, but he's in for a shock. Knight e3, queen b5, and now in this position where black is expecting to win that bishop on g5, the astonishing move bishop f6 comes on the chessboard, and this sets up the tactical motif known as the windmill. The problem for black is that his queen on b5 is unprotected. Yes, he can take the white queen, but now bang, rook takes g7 check, and this is most inconvenient for black. He now has to follow white's tune over the next few moves. White takes on f7, discovered check. The king goes back to g8. Rook g7, this is one of the most depressing situations in chess for the defender. He's just got to follow the tune. The rook wreaks havoc on the 7th rank. In comes the rook one more time. King h8. Rook g5 check, excuse me. King h7. Rook takes h5. And now here's the last hope for black. King g6. This is a fork. Just shows you that even the king can fork. But after rook h3, king takes f6, rook takes h6 check. It turns out that when the smoke clears, black is actually 3 pawns down. So after the tactical fireworks, actually the realisation of this advantage is fairly easy for white. 3 pawns are 3 pawns. There's no real escape in this situation. White simply plays a3 to protect his pawn on the queen side. Maybe Lasker was just fed up with the way the game had gone, otherwise he would have resigned. There's no hope. White just exchanges off, and life is very simple if you do that in chess. Rook takes e6 check, another one goes down the drain. King g5, and now the winning move g3, protecting the attacked rook and preventing the back rank mate with rook b1. So a terrific game, and a very exciting game. Not perfect, of course, but the world champion of the day doesn't often get defeated in that manner. So the moral of the story: watch out for the windmill in your games. Try to execute the windmill if you can. My fourth game illustrates what happens to you if you go pawn grabbing in the opening. Well, all that happens in the game you're about to see is that the development of the opponent is accelerated to the situation where he can initiate favourable tactical complications and win easily. We are going to look at the game Nybeck versus Lehikoinen. This game was played in Stockholm in 2003. Nybeck is a particularly strong master, so it's surprising to see him get crushed in this manner. White kicks off with one of the most solid first moves of all, knight f3, and no sign from the opening moves that this is going to be a tactical game. It's a fairly standard variation of the English opening, where white opens up the centre with d4, trying to get an advantage there. Black takes the pawn, white recaptures, and now black plays his pawn up to e6. But now I guess white's next move sets the tone for the game and determines that it will be predominantly tactical in the opening. White plays knight to b5. That's an unnatural looking move in many respects. This is the third time that that white has moved the knight. But white is basing his play on concrete objectives. He wants to be able to play knight d6 check and take away black's dark squared bishop. Well, of course, black can invite white to do this, and that's precisely what Lehikoinen did. I think the problem for black's position is if he plays a move like d6, which seems to scotch the white threat, then bishop f4 might be quite strong. Yes, black can block the threat one more time by playing, for instance, a move like e5, but then the d5 square is very weak, and white can hope to zero in on that square by retreating his knight should it be pushed back by a6 and then going into d5 at a later date. That would be a major positional concession for black to make. So in the game, black decides, okay, if he wants to go knight d6 check, he can. I'm going to speed up my development to the maximum possible extent, and so he develops a knight. Surprisingly, white doesn't go knight d6 check, instead preferring to bring his knight out to c3. And now black plays d5 himself. Now you do begin to wonder about the position of the knight on b5, but white is basing his entire opening play, as I say, on the thought of winning a pawn, and he's going to win the pawn with the help of the move queen takes d5. Now it looks at first sight as though white has gone completely mad in this position, because isn't he giving his queen away? Well, the fact is, if black grabs the queen on d5, white is going in with a nasty three-way fork on c7, and when black moves his king to d8, white will back on d5, and then he'll be a full pawn up for nothing. So that is white's intention. Now what is black going to do about it? Well, of course, in a situation like this, you've got to consider every move by the opponent, not just what you want him to play. And bishop b4 check is an excellent reply. The point of this is that after bishop d2, black intends to continue momentum by castling. And I've no doubt at all that Nybeck thought to himself, well, okay, if I take the queens off here, I shouldn't be in too much danger. But the fact is that black's lead in development is already so great that white may be in extremely serious trouble in this position already. Well, okay, the queens are off. But white's next move is very, very dangerous. Casting queenside straight into the black attack. Going back, it was surely more sensible to play knight to c3. I mean, that would at least give white hopes of survival, but it must be that after bishop e6, black has plenty of play for the pawn. I mean, he's got all his pieces out. The white king has yet to find any sanctuary, and it will take him a long time to do so. Meanwhile, black has threats based upon knight d4. So black has extremely good play for the pawn in this position. However, in the game, and going back to castles on the queen side, after bishop e6, black really is in business. I mean, his immediate threat is rook a to c8, pounding down the c-file towards the poor old white king. And black's also threatening bishop takes a2 as well. So white seems to be very materialistic. He decides to play a3. But now comes a superb move, after which black's attack becomes unstoppable. Bishop b3. Attacking the rook, taking note of the fact that bishop on d2 is pinned. White takes on b4, following the logic that he may as well die with his belly full, and black recaptures with the knight. Now there are many threats brewing. White retreats his knight to c3. Black brings up the reserves. The last piece comes into the attack. Rook a c8. White is getting very pinned up here on the queen side. Rook e1, trying to step out of one pin, but knight c2 is a very unpleasant move to meet. If white goes e3 in this position, knight takes e1, bishop takes e1, rook d1 is actually checkmate. What a pathetic position for white, with most of his pieces on the back rank and the only developed piece pinned. Well, white didn't do that in the game, but he found another way to lose. He went back with his rook to d1. Black went knight b4, toying with white. Rook e1, and now rook c5. And it turns out that white can't defend himself against the invasion after rook a5 and then rook a1 checkmate. Let's just see him try to do so. If he plays e3, rook a5, king b1, bishop c2, king c1, and now the rook comes down to a1, checkmate. Another classic example of tactics springing naturally from the better position. In this case, black was able to launch even a sacrificial attack against the white king position simply because white didn't develop his pieces. That's what happens when you don't develop in your pieces. You get murdered in your bed. My next game is a brilliant tactical adventure by black, but of course white sets the scene for his own demise by grabbing hot pawns in the opening. It comes from a tournament played in Antalya in Turkey in 2004. Playing white is a fellow called Ersahin, who I imagine is a Turkish player. Playing black is a fellow called Bakarlats, whose grade is about 2350, so that is good master standard on the international rating scheme. And the opening is a Sicilian defence. This is one of black's sharpest responses to the king's pawn. It's the one which is favoured by many master players when they want to play flat out for the win. It promotes asymmetry and almost always an exciting game. And white meets the Sicilian by playing the open variation. He opens the centre with d4, promoting a tactical struggle. Alright, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and black plays g6. Black is focusing on the square d4, trying to destroy white's control of the central area. Well, white protects his knight with bishop e3, and black brings out the knight with knight f6. This is known as the accelerated dragon variation. Now white goes in for this tactical adventure. Knight takes c6, b takes c6, and now e5, which at first sight looks awkward for black, but black can actually sacrifice a pawn in this situation with knight d5. Well, the position's by no means clear after knight takes d5, c takes d5, queen takes d5, but black's point is that in order to grab this pawn, white has lost a little bit of time. The queen on d5 is exposed to attacks from, well, maybe the bishop coming to b7 or the pawn coming back to e6. And black's rook on b8 has become very active and is immediately attacking the pawn on b2. So, I guess you could say this is a sacrifice for time. Alright, bishop comes to c4. There are many moves for white in this situation, but this seems to be a pretty good option. Bishop develops with gain of time because of course white is now threatening checkmate on f7. However, black plays a move he wants to play anyway. He castles, and now white decides to take the bull by the horns and castle on the queen side. It's clear that this is going to be an extremely risky option because he's castling straight into black's attack. Well, of course, as long as black can get his major pieces on those files. Queen c7 seems to fit the bill. Queen comes to a nice attacking position on the c file and attacks the pawn on e5. Well, of course, that pawn is white's pride and joy. White's a pawn up. He shouldn't surrender the pawn on e5 because, of course, the pawn on e5 is restricting the bishop on g7, which is, of course, the point behind black's next move. Black wants to bring this bishop to life, and as soon as that bishop is brought to life, then the pawn on b2 starts to look very creaky indeed. E takes d6, an amazing move. Just giving up b2 like that. What is white trying to do? What is he doing here? Well, white thinks that he's the master of tactics in this situation, but well, I just think that's an extremely risky move. He takes d6, as you'll see. But it may well be that this position after d6 is okay for black anyway. For instance, take a look at this game, which was played in Portugal in 2001, where white decided to retreat with queen d3, and after d takes e5, f takes e5, bishop f5 was the excellent move. Then came queen e2, and now rook fc8, a dream position for black in this line, with all his pieces converging on the white king. Bishop d3 was white's defensive move. Queen takes e5. Again, attacking b2. Pawn up to c3. And now with all the firepower converging on the king, it's not really surprising that black can unleash a beautiful sacrificial attack with rook takes c3 check. And if b takes c3, queen takes c3, queen c2, and now showing the power of the pin, the amazing move, rook b1 check. That's absolutely superb. The queen would like to take, but she's pinned, and when the king takes, queen a1 checkmate. That's what happens to you when you neglect your development and go on material hunts. Well, going back to Sahin versus Baccarat, we rejoin the game with white playing the amazing move he takes d6. Well, of course, I don't suppose black could believe his luck. He goes bishop takes b2 check, king b1. Now bishop e5, discovered check, and clearly white's intention in this position was just to go bishop b3. And he was hoping that he could negotiate the complications. But common sense should just have told him that after bishop takes d6, black has not only regained all the material he lost earlier, or sacrificed, he's opened up the white king. And it's hard to play chess when your king is wide open. Well, okay, white decided to cover his dark squares with bishop c1. But bishop f5 was again an excellent move. Developing with gain of time. The bishop on b3 is pinned, so black is threatening queen takes c2 check. That's the direct threat. So white unpins with bishop b2, but after bishop takes f4, not only is black material ahead here, he's still got a massive attack. Rook hf1. Rook b to d8. Just going back, black might have been tempted with rook takes b3 here, and if queen takes b3, that's the only move to cover c2, rook b8. But it's here I think that white can actually keep himself in the game with queen takes b8 check. Yes, I know it's a sacrifice of the queen, but he intends to follow it up with rook takes f4. I mean, I think black is better in this situation, but it's going to be unclear. The point is that black can't take the rook here because of rook d8 when black himself gets mated. And if he can't take the rook, I don't know, white's got two rooks for the queen, his king's exposed, but you know, anything could happen here. So going back to the game, this is why black played the careful move rook b d8, attacking the queen. Queen went back to f3, rook takes d1 check, queen takes d1, and now simple chess in a winning position, bishop e5, neutralising the power of the bishop on b2. g4, white's getting desperate, bishop takes b2, king takes b2, and now another little tactical interchange, bishop e6, bishop takes e6, queen e5 check. The in-between move, the Zwischenzug, exposing the white king and regaining material. White tried queen f3, and now rook b8 was the concluding move. White's king has chosen to live life on the edge of the board, but with threats such as queen a6 check imminent, it's not going to be living for much longer. So a game with many tactical moments. I hope you enjoyed it, and well, I don't think white will be venturing that variation again in a hurry. My final illustrative game is an excellent encounter. It comes from the United States Championship, played in May 2009. Playing white is Ilda Ibragimov, he's a Grandmaster, and playing black, International Master Michael Brooks. And what this game will teach us is that tactics, winning tactics, spring naturally from the better position. What actually happens in this game, just to give you an overview, is that black is outplayed by white, and at the end white is able to force favourable tactical complications as a result of having the better position. It really goes against the grain in chess to be able to win the game through the use of tactics when you haven't got the better position. You know, generally in chess you might be able to wriggle out of a difficult situation using tactics, but tactics spring naturally from the better position. This is the message that should come across. Alright, well, white opens in this game with a standard queen's pawn, opening, taking the centre with his pawns and bringing the knight out to f3. I must admit, Brooks's next move is slightly unusual. You wouldn't normally see black moving the same piece twice in the opening, but I think there are two ideas behind it. Strong masters do not make a move like this lightly. I think the first intention is that black might be thinking of reinforcing that knight by playing f5 at a certain moment, and certainly the move bishop b4 check is in black's mind, after which there might be a little bit of pressure on white's dark squares near the queen. So white decides to proceed cautiously with e3, and now black does in fact flick in the check on b4. White plays knight bd2, black plays b6. Obviously Brooks has decided that he wants his bishop on b7. Bishop comes to d3, and this really forces the issue. Black is now simplifying down, swapping off two pairs of minor pieces, and then he puts his bishop on b7. So this is a reasonable way for black to play, but most masters would prefer to be white in this situation, mainly because white has two nice bishops. In particular, the bishop on d2 could become very powerful the longer the game goes on, because that's the piece in this position black doesn't have. So white is thinking about strategic play already, opening up prospects for the dark squared bishop. Black can contest every single piece, but he cannot contest the dark squared bishop. So whereas Brooks's idea is ingenious, his opening idea is clever, I'm not at all sure that that black has equalised the game fully in this situation, although he has simplified his task to a certain extent by swapping off those pieces. Well, white takes the centre with e4, black castles, and then Ibragimov brings out his queen to h5. So white might be thinking about playing e5 here, unleashing the power of the queen and the bishop against h7. So black plays f6. If white plays e5 now, then it's possible black may respond with f5, blocking the threat. So instead of e5 straight away, Ibragimov decides to castle on the queen side, and now it's going to be a question of whether white can push home his attack before black gets his queen side pieces out. Well, Brooks played queen e8. I think that's a sensible move. He's offering the exchange of queens, after which white's attack dissipates. So white refuses the exchange of queens, retreating to h3. Now black plays e5, and the idea of this is to break the power of the bishop on d3. White is not going to be allowed to play e5 to unleash that bishop himself. However, e5 is a move with downsides as well, because what it means is that this bishop is going to become stronger. If white can leave open the game for the bishop, the dark squared bishop, which he's now starting to do by playing f4, then black could run into difficulties. Knight d7, f5, interesting move. White blocks the position, but once again he's thinking of a pawn lever. He's thinking of going g4 and then g5. He's thinking about playing his rook to g1, and then at the end of it all he's thinking about pounding down on g7. And it's no secret that that pawn is fixed on a dark square, which makes it a natural target for white's bishop on d2. Knight c5, g4, queen a4. Of course black could take the bishop on d3 in this position, but that bishop isn't doing very much, and he also exchanges off a pretty good knight for well, what is actually not a particularly good bishop. Moreover, in this opposite colour bishop situation, white still has his natural attacking plan of h4 and then g5 available. Going back to the game, black played queen a4 and white played king b1 to protect the pawn on a2. Bishop a6. Black is piling up on the pawn at c4. Bishop c2. Ibragimov is happy to jettison the pawn in return for time on the black queen. The black queen retreats, and now a further attacking move by white gaining momentum, g5. So white sacrificed his pawn for time and momentum. F takes g5. Bishop takes g5. The bishop is now starting to come into the game. White is starting to think about tactical strikes on the black king side. Brooks defends g7 carefully by playing rook f7. And now the next move by white is rather ominous. Rook to g1. I think with this move, white announces that he's going to put all his firepower on the g file and then play bishop h6. And so it proves. In come the white rooks to the attack. Black tries to rush the knight back to the defence, but white doubles up his rooks. I think white is now thinking about maybe tripling the major pieces on that file by putting his queen on either g3 or g2. It's interesting to see that once black took that pawn on c4, his own attack has evaporated. Brooks played queen c5. Rook comes to g3. Rook a f8. Queen g2. Rook comes to g8, and now the move we have been expecting, bishop h6, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn on g7 is pinned. Knight f6. Bang. Rook takes g7. The problem for Brooks was that his queen is a long way from the action on the king side, and the bishop on a6 isn't really doing anything at all as far as a defensive function is maintained. So rook takes g7 really, you could say, is a winning move. Queen takes g1 check was played by black. He's hoping to buy a little bit of time by exchanging off a few pieces. And now in this situation, Brooks has got a rook and a knight for the queen. But if white plays carefully, it's hard to see this being enough. The problem for black is he's also got an exposed king. And white should be able to find a way to combine threats using his queen to take advantage of this situation. Well, Ibragimov played queen e1. Black played king g8. And now white played queen to c3. Bishop came to b5. And now a4 was a good move by white, giving his king a little bit more room and perhaps intending to leave open the black queen side with the help of moves like b5 and then a5. It's interesting to see that although black can check on the back rank, let's say with rook g1 check, this really doesn't achieve very much after king b2. The white king is protected by a sturdy screen of bishop and pawns, and white will be looking for a way to manoeuvre his queen into the game, possibly with the help of moves like a5 and then queen a3, followed by the opening up of the queen side. So after b4, black went a6. I mean, I think that looks like the move of a man in time trouble, because it actually just makes the black queen side easier to attack for white. White went queen to d3. Black went a5. B takes a5. White is quick to seize on the opportunity. Queen c3. And now bishop takes a4. Well, that really does look a rather desperate move. It looks like the move of a man who has no time on the clock. He's just rushing. Bishop takes a4. Knight takes e4. Maybe there'll be some tricks, but white just takes another pawn. Rook e7. Okay, probably black was so short of time he didn't have enough time to resign, because it's now completely hopeless. The queen shows her terrific mobility there, switching from one side of the board to the other. King f7, and now bishop d1. Another elegant move, setting up ideas, winning ideas of bishop h5 check. So not an enormous number of tactics in that game, but when the tactics arrived on g7, black was quite unable to resist, because, well, he had been strategically outplayed to that point. So very good game by Ibragimov, and